What is the difference between being honest or being vulnerable? And why does it matter when it comes to our relationships, whether it's our friendships or our intimate partnerships? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Relationship Atlas podcast. Today, we are discussing honesty versus vulnerability. Now, I recently was a part of a men's group. We got together, it's called the King's Circle. And I was having a pretty tough day. I didn't really want to be there. I didn't want to share. I didn't want to communicate. The only reason I showed up is because I committed to, because I had it in my calendar, because I know that it will benefit me to follow through on my commitments even when I don't want to. So I showed up and I knew I wasn't okay. I knew that I was having a difficult go and that it was an emotional day for me. But as I got into the conversation, I recognized something really powerful about myself as I started to share a little bit more and hear some of the conversations that these men were having. And the realization was that I'm really good at being honest. I'm a very charismatic person. I'm a very open person. At least that's how I believe myself to be. I will be the first to share something difficult. I will be ahead of the game when it comes to acknowledging parts of myself. But the difficulty that I recognized is that I am not good at being vulnerable. Vulnerable is a different experience altogether than honesty is for me. Honesty is something that I think I've come to terms with and that I have started to talk to myself about. I've had inner dialogue about it. Vulnerability is something that I haven't really addressed. Maybe it's an open wound or something that I feel a lot of shame for. Those things are more difficult for me to share, either with my partner or especially with a group of men. And this really got me thinking about the differences. This was the first time I separated the two in my life. And so, as I started to indulge in some research and some deeper understanding of the two words separate from each other, I started to recognize that this is actually quite common, that a lot of us are really good at being honest, and a lot of us are not so good at being vulnerable. And as a man, it is even more prevalent that we have the ability to be honest about something, but we don't have such a strong ability to be vulnerable about something or be in a vulnerable state. So today, I want to support us with some awareness. What is honesty? What is vulnerability? What are the shadow sides of both honesty and vulnerability? Because whenever there is light, there is dark. When there is love, there is hate. Everything operates on a spectrum. And so, what we'll address today is what is honesty perceived as, and how can it be also utilized in the shadow form? Same thing with vulnerability to help us better understand what's alive for us in our relationships and maybe some of the reasons why we aren't feeling as connected or struggle to get as deep with the people in our lives as much as we want to. So let's first start with honesty. Honesty is defined online through the dictionary as the state of being honest. So honesty is essentially an expression of being honest. So what does that honest mean? Honest means free of deceit and untruthfulness. So you're free of deceit and you're free of a lack of truth. And in another way, honesty is essentially the truth. So the truth of the matter is something that I can share, even if it is maybe not the absolute truth. And that was something, again, that I recognized. I could get to a deep truth. I could get to something that most maybe wouldn't share. But in a lot of ways, what I was sharing was something that I've already addressed. Right? I'm a very busy mind. I am constantly doing work, inner work, external work. I'm constantly looking for the deeper why, the deeper reasoning, the deeper cause. And so I'm so busy in my mind that I have faced so many parts of myself. Now, I use the word faced simply from the phrase of, or from the meaning of, I've turned towards them, but I haven't necessarily healed through them. And I definitely haven't, in a lot of ways, embodied the experience of a healed system. in the sections of, let's say, truth. And so when it comes to being honest, I have the capacity to tell the truth. I have the capacity to be honest and share honestly. But I have a difficult time when I haven't faced a part of me, which is the correlation to vulnerability. So, staying with honesty here for a second, some of the things that I wrote down for me around what honesty is something that I've faced internally, something that I have likely come to terms with to some extent, something that I know I can speak clearly about, even if it feels difficult. And I don't have a lot of worry about judgment or rejection because I have already spent time judging or rejecting that piece. Now, maybe I've accepted it as well, which makes it easy to be honest. And so, oftentimes, the things that we've accepted don't necessarily come out as a vulnerable share, they come out as an honest share. This is just the honesty of my experience. This is the truth of my experience. So, that's how I started to define honesty. Now, what does it mean to be vulnerable then? What is vulnerability? Why is it different? Well, being vulnerable, as defined in the dictionary, says susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. I wrote right after that something that invokes a state of weakness. So a vulnerable share is open to threat, which is why a lot of us are not vulnerable because it is very scary and very worrisome. Our number one priority is safety. Nothing supersedes that. It is what we spend all our time doing. It's often and is the reason why we find faults in everything or we find errors in everything because it allows us to protect ourselves from that specific thing. And so being vulnerable says, I want to shut that system down here for a second. And I want to create a different type of experience, which is staying open with intention. A couple of the things I wrote down here for vulnerability is that specific thing that feels vulnerable is or has a fear of being judged or rejected harshly. It's kind of like an open wound that hasn't scarred over. A lot of times it's unprocessed information. So I directly correlate that with the honesty, which is often processed information, things I've already moved through in my own mind. Vulnerability is often not quite clear. It can come out a little chaotic, a little messy, a little confusing. So it leaves, again, an interpretation to be misunderstood or judged harshly or rejected. Vulnerability doesn't often have a solution or an answer to it yet. But it's ironically the part of you that craves to be seen or heard or witnessed or accepted the most. But because that's how much it craves those things, because that has a high level of craving for those things, it then simultaneously has just as deep of a worry about that not happening or about the opposite happening and it being rejected. And so it keeps it hidden, it keeps it within. So, honesty and vulnerability, very different terms, very different experiences, both with people and within our own system. Now, now that we've understood a bit more of the definition and how they show up, there's also a aspect of both of these that is called the shadow side. Now, the shadow side is the side that we tend to hide away, we tend to not understand or face, or that may be getting in the way, even though it feels like we're being vulnerable or we're being honest. Why am I not getting the results I'm looking for? And it's often a part of us that we don't feel good or feel confident in facing. So let's start with the shadow side of honesty. The shadow side of honesty can sound like this is just who I am. Right? It's weaponizing who you are as a person. Another one is I'm just being honest. You can hear in the tonality that it's almost used, honesty being used as the way to allow or give space for disrespect or damaging without care or concern for the impact. So, another way to potentially language this is weaponized honesty. So, the shadow side of honesty is a bit more manipulative, and a bit more protective. Protective specifically is the word I lean into because manipulation is often simply a form of protection. I am just looking to be safe here. So, therefore, I have curated a system of things that will help me do so. And so, when I say to you, I don't know what the problem is, I'm just being honest. What I'm telling you is there's a part of me in this conversation that has a difficulty connecting, that is fearing closeness, and that is concerned with sharing something more vulnerable or allowing you to see a part of me that maybe I haven't faced yet. And therefore, I'm just being honest. It's more of a cutthroat, no openness, no relationality in that conversation. And so it's a form of protection. Now, it can be difficult to honor this part because you may also then shame the other way internally. Why do I say that? Why do I manipulate? What's wrong with me? But I would argue that all of us have a system of protection that can be perceived as manipulation and therefore really easy for us to start shaming ourselves and telling ourselves we're bad people for that, when the reality is all of us are doing it. All of us are looking for ways to have our needs met, and we do so in our own unique way based on the experiences we've had so far in life. And this is why it's called the shadow side, because it's one we're not often aware of. It's a bit hiding in the dark. It's not somewhere that's very visible to our experience. Shadow vulnerability is very similar, right? It's a form of protection. And again, another form of trying to get our needs met. So, examples are if I bear everything, you'll be obligated to love me, right? If I'm super open and I just get really into the depth of vulnerable pieces of me that I've never shared before, or that I'm not comfortable with, or that bring emotion, or that make me be perceived in a weak position, then why would you not feel obligated to love me? Look how much I'm giving you, right? Victimhood can be involved in here. Look at how much I've been through. You should treat me delicately, right? Look, my life has been so difficult. Why are you giving me feedback? My life has been so difficult. Why are you giving me criticism? Why are you being harsh towards me? Maybe that person isn't necessarily doing that. However, that person will use vulnerability or the vulnerable parts of themselves to get their need met. Right. Another example is I've never told anyone this before. There's nothing wrong inherently with the statement, but what we're reflecting here within ourselves is what is my intention with telling somebody that? Right? What is my intention with being vulnerable here? What is my intention with being honest here? And can I start to recognize in reflection if I was being truly vulnerable there, or if I was in fact trying to get a need met? If I was in fact working my way around the actual depth of vulnerability in order to have them respond in a way that would meet my need. So I'll share a personal example. When I was in the men's group, and this is where this conversation really sparked for me, the men were sharing, and as they were doing so, I had the opportunity to go in my own head and decipher what I could share that would be honest, but in truth might be a better answer than the rest. That's difficult for me to share. It's slightly vulnerable. I can sense a bit of discomfort as I share that with you. I can sense that you could judge me for that, sharing that with you right now. That part of me that had this idea of like, okay, well, what's the best answer? What would be the one that would really get everybody thinking? What would be what would make me the main attraction in the room? So I'm trying to get a need met there. Again, as I just said that last part, I can sense discomfort in me. I can sense vulnerability there. So I'm noticing that there's an interplay now in the conversation with you right now of honesty and vulnerability. But what I'm also now even more aware of is, am I sharing that with you for the same reasons that I shared it with them in the men's group? Is it to then provoke in you some sort of um, offering to me that, I'm the main character here, right? I am the person who's going to go there, right? Nothing wrong with those things, but am I doing it to manipulate the process. And that is really where I think this conversation comes alive for me, is understanding honesty and how comfortable I am with being honest, understanding vulnerability and sensing how confident I am in taking that on, in being in a weak position or a susceptible position to threat, right? It also helps me understand my confidence level, right? My confidence level in who I am at my core, at the deep parts of me, at the depth of me, how confident I am in those pieces. And then what it helps me better understand is, okay, now how does that all interplay in my relationships? So when I think about my friendships, how often am I vulnerable in my friendships? I can speak directly to that. I'm not very vulnerable. That's just the truth. With my friends, I am not very vulnerable, but I am very honest. In my relationship, I am very honest and I'm also vulnerable. I wouldn't say very vulnerable, but I would say vulnerable because my attachment style, which is also an interplay in this conversation, my attachment style historically has been anxious. And so, what I have a tendency to do is do whatever it takes to be loved, be accepted, and not be abandoned. And so, in a relational dynamic, being vulnerable has been used historically as a tactic to gather and garner love, to gather and garner acceptance, and to basically ensure that if I'm in a vulnerable enough state, how could you leave somebody who's that vulnerable? And that's the shadow side, right? It's an example of the shadow side of vulnerability. And so, what we get to decipher through this process here is just a simple question around what's my intention here? And to put it even probably more clearly, because it's difficult to start there, is just in reflection. Taking the time in reflection to recognize, okay, what in that moment, was there anything that I needed that I was protecting myself from in order to get? Was there something that I needed from the room? Was there something I needed from my partner that instead of directly communicating, I ended up using the honesty or vulnerability from it? Maybe, in fact, the need itself was too vulnerable. And so we were vulnerable about something else. These are just different forms of either proactive reflection or um, post experience reflection that just help us better understand, are we being honest? Are we being vulnerable? And why I believe that that's a very helpful and very courageous thing to do is because what you'll find is in the discovery of your answers, you'll find the reality of your relationships. You'll find all of the questions you may be asking, you'll find the answers to around why do I not connect with people? Why do I not feel deeply connected with friends? Why do I not feel deeply connected with family, with my partner? Why do I feel good about the relationship, but still at a slight disconnect for some reason? And I don't really quite know. And the answer may be that you're quite honest, but you're not really that vulnerable. You're not letting this person see the parts of you that are difficult, that don't feel great, that you may not like, that are quote unquote the shadow sides of you. A lot of deep connection comes from deep exploration of each other. And so when you can get into that a little bit, when you can get to this almost curious questioning of tell me more about you. Like, hey, tell me more about like why you did that, or like what brought you to do that, or why you think that way. Tell me, what do you think? And get that like curiosity, and you'll notice that when you have those kinds of conversations with the people in your lives, you start to feel more deeply connected to them because there's a vulnerability there, but there's also an acceptance there, an acceptance of the vulnerability. There is a welcoming of the vulnerability. There is a willingness to be seen and to be heard and to be understood in that vulnerability. And in a lot of our lives, that's the kind of healing we're looking for to then be able to face those parts of us. And that can actually be the catalyst for change. It can be the catalyst for pattern disruption. It can be the catalyst for uh, creating new wiring in our mind. And I think as we have this conversation, we can just start to recognize that honesty and vulnerability as separate entities play a big role in that. So that's the conversation for today. That's the kind of things I'd like to invite you to start exploring about yourself. Now, it doesn't need to be this world where you start to jump in and say, God, am I just a big manipulator here? Am I ever vulnerable? Those questions can help, but only if they come from a position of honesty and come from a position of fairness towards yourself, a position of grace for yourself, for all of the things you've been through, for all of the ways in which you've operated in the past, and grace for the reality that this is just how it is currently, but it doesn't mean that it needs to stay that way. Now you have different language, now you have a different awareness, and now you have the opportunity to approach things in a way that you feel more in control about, and a way that you feel more confident about. So, just before we finish, I'd love to offer you just some questions to be able to get a little bit deeper into vulnerability and face some parts of yourself that maybe haven't been leaned in towards or have been thrown into the shadows. Now, I encourage you to just open yourself up to whatever answers come to these questions. They are designed to dig a little deeper and allow you or invite you into the depth of yourself, right? The deeper often that you can go with yourself, the deeper that you can go with the people in your life. So here's a couple of questions for you. When do I feel like a fraud or a fake, even when I'm doing well? Second question, what part of myself do I try the hardest to hide from other people? Third question, what do I secretly wish I could get away with? Fourth question, what would I do if I knew I wouldn't be punished? And the last question that I have for you today is, what image do I try to project? And what am I afraid people would see if they looked deeper? I love that last question. That last one really got me. But all of the questions are powerful. And so I would encourage you just to rewind, give them another listen, and give yourself some space. There may be some difficulty, and you may notice maybe some anger, some frustration, some irritation or annoyance to some of these questions. And there may actually be a wall in the way. And that would be very unsurprising, specifically because these are questions that are attempting to shine a flashlight on certain parts of you that you may not know are there. And so it can be difficult because we've built protective mechanisms to make sure that we don't go there and that those parts of us are safe in the shadows. And so it can feel difficult to go there, difficult to embrace those parts. But I encourage you to lean a little closer, chip away a little bit more today, just to see what's there with no judgment, no shame, no guilt. If there's a full wall up and that's just not happening today, no problem, right? Try again tomorrow, right? I'm inviting you to be courageous in the journey of self discovery and in the journey of leaning into the difficulty or the challenging parts of yourself so that we can start to come to terms with them. So we can start to build relationships with them, these parts of us that we tend to shy away from. So go back, write those questions down, save this specific episode so that you can come back to the questions. And then again, just allow yourself to explore without judgment, without guilt, without shame, with just simply an opening of realizations. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode sparked some really powerful thinking for you. I know that it did for me when I started to really get into the difference between honesty and vulnerability. And it's really helped me acknowledge, like, when am I vulnerable? When am I honest? And what's deterring me from one or the other, right? What's getting in the way? And how is it impacting the quality of my relationships, both my intimate relationship and with my friendships and with my family, right? And there's always some interplay there. And so the more I can start to be aware of things, the quicker I can catch myself, maybe withholding, withdrawing, shutting down, hiding. And then I can say, okay, is that what I still want to do? Is the hiding still a system that works for me now? Or is it time for something different? All of this, in my opinion, is the journey or the process to being more authentic, to feeling more free. And the reality I've learned for myself is the more things I have imprisoned in my mind, the less free I am on the outside world. And so every time I unlock the cage and shine a light in there and let them out and bring them to the table with everybody else, the more authentic and free I start to feel. And the more access I have to the world and life and reality and all that it has to offer. Thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Relationship Atlas podcast. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. Have a good day.